We are just about 2 weeks away from the opening of college football 2014 on that Thursday, August 28th, and we bring in John Cassillo of Noon's Magician on the Syracuse platform on SB Nation. John, thanks so much for joining us. We're going to talk ACC. So John covers Syracuse in depth, but if you check out his work on the SB Nation platform, you certainly understand that he follows the ACC and college football very intently. So we'd like to run through the ACC, give you a landscape look at the conference coming up this season, and it all, of course, John, starts with Florida State in the Atlantic Division, 14-0. Jameis Winston, the Heisman winner, the whole deal really separated itself from the rest of the conference, and we kind of saw this coming for a number of years where maybe they underachieved a bit, but we saw the national recruiting rankings and knew, for the most part, that explosiveness that they had going to the NFL, and if there could be any dark horses in this division.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, like you said, Florida State's the place to begin any conversation about the ACC, especially the Atlantic. The amount of talent that was on that team last year was absolutely overwhelming. As a team that was trounced by them, 59-3. We saw it firsthand. It was just too much on both sides of the ball. And despite how many players went to the NFL this past April, doesn't even matter. This team is loaded with 4- and 5-star guys at every single position. Along the front, they are absolutely lethal on both sides. Obviously Jameis Winston you all know him, may not love him, but you know him. I think Mario Edwards is actually somebody that everyone should keep an eye out for. You might remember him a couple of years ago, #1 recruit in the nation. I see him as a huge breakout performer nationally this season. I think he's really going to guide that defense. I think with Clemson, you're looking at one of the top probably 7 to 10 defenses in the country, which is weird when you consider where they were just a few years ago. Getting absolutely destroyed by West Virginia in the Orange Bowl, and now that team potentially has what might be one of the best pass rushes with Andre Branch and Corey Crawford. No, sorry, not Andre Branch. He used to be there. Vic Beasley and Corey Crawford.
Yep.
Rushing, and I have a feeling that those names are going to be heard quite a bit. They're gonna find their way on offense. It's going to take some time. I think Cole Stout is the answer. I don't think he's Taj Boyd, but he'll do, and Chad Morris is still there as the offensive coordinator. So in that regard, they're in good hands. From there, the Atlantic's pretty wide open. I think Louisville and Syracuse are probably, in some order, 3-4. There's some bias there, but at the same time, Louisville does have to make some replacements. Bobby Petrino will mold Will Gardner into a very good quarterback, but we'll see how long that takes. And then I think BC, NC State, and Wake kind of take up the rear. I think all those teams, are going through some transition. I think NC State is most poised to kind of break into, if it happens, that top 3 or 4 in the division. I think BC just has a lot to replace from last year's senior-laden team. And Wake, same deal. New coaching staff, new quarterback, pretty much knew everything at Wake. And it's going to take a little while as they change schemes, they change system, and really kind of get that program back on its feet.
Now, John, did I hear that right? NC State would be the team that could break into the upper tier.
Yeah. I mean, it hurts to say as a team that's in that kind of second tier with Louisville, but if there's any team that can do it, Dave Dorn's in year 2. When you're dealing with a spread system, it takes some time to get your guys in. Last year, they just looked completely out of sorts. They didn't have the quarterback they needed. They had, too many issues of attrition. They had running back problems when it came to staying on the field. I think this year their schedule allows them to win 6 games without much issue. NC State classically is scheduled some of the easiest non-conference opponents you'll find out of all the power conferences, and that really helps them kind of get back on their feet very quickly. So, yeah, if there's any team that they could break into that top 3 or 4, I think State looks primed.
Yeah, non-conference slate for NC State: Georgia Southern, Old Dominion, South Florida Presbyterian. That's the first 4 games of the season. They better
basically
be 4-0 at that point.
schools.
Yes. Wow. and then on the flip side, Clemson. Got to respect the Clemson scheduling system here. Of course, they got to play South Carolina that final game, so that's just become a very difficult game where it was always a substantial game, but now with South Carolina winning 11 games, 3 consecutive seasons, ranked in the top 5 last year, they may not be able to, with the losses they've had on defense, and Connor Shaw may not be quite that good, but still a number 9 ranked team preseason. So Clemson, when they automatically have the South Carolina rivalry, and then Georgia off the top, I know this doesn't affect ACC play, but 2 very difficult games for Clemson, and then you got to respect the 2 non-division games for Clemson. They've got North Carolina and they've got Georgia Tech, 2 of the better teams in the other division. Florida State taking on Oklahoma State. I think that's going to be a bit of a bump in the road. Unfortunately, it would have been probably a better game last season. And then we'll address the influx of Notre Dame games and the effect that has. But I'm just kind of interested in your take on NC State, because just looking at the surface, 3-9, 0-8 in the conference, from a program that has typically won 7-8 football games, gotten to decent bowl games over the past 20 years or so. So we move on to where you had the top-heavy Atlantic Division. We go to the Coastal, where Duke came out of nowhere, surprised everyone, won 10 games, got to the championship game. Virginia Tech, Georgia Tech, Pitt, Miami, and North Carolina, the 3rd ACC team that's ranked in the preseason coaches poll. You throw a blanket over those teams. They could go anywhere from 6-6 to 8-4, possibly 9-3. Your thoughts about one team, 2 teams that could possibly separate themselves?
I don't think there's going to be any separation, even when it comes to the end of the season. I think Miami and North Carolina are the 2 most talented teams in that division. If you look at balance between offense and defense, I think Virginia Tech's defense is probably the 2nd best in the conference, or I'd say 3rd, behind Florida State and Clemson, but best in that division. But if you can't score points, having a great defense doesn't always work, and I think we've seen that as Beamer ball has kind of backfired in the last couple of years, where the offense can't seem to move the ball, and despite the fact that there's a stress on defense, and Bud Foster obviously does a fantastic job over there, it's very hard to beat a team if you can't score more than 10 points. So I think that while Virginia Tech seems like they yet again have the defense to win the division, I just think North Carolina and Miami, especially if Ryan Williams is able to come back, and by all accounts it seems that he's going to have one of the fastest ACL recoveries I've ever seen. There was talk of him even being ready for the opener. I doubt that, but if Miami can get its quarterback play in check, I think that it's going to be either Miami or North Carolina that kind of establish themselves 1-2. They're still probably going to go like 6-2 in the division and only win about 8 to 9 games, but it's progress. It's funny because the Coastal, a lot of people think of it as this kind of like moribund division that really kind of has no rules, but at the same time, every year but one, either Georgia Tech or Virginia Tech has won it. Now, some ineligibility issues were also at play there, but Duke's the first non-Tech team to win the Coastal, and we're a decade into this alignment at this point. So I do think that, like I said, I think Miami and North Carolina are the teams to beat, but don't be surprised if you see Virginia Tech, Duke, or I'd say I put Pittsburgh at 5. I think there is like a top 4. I think Pittsburgh's kind of that 5th place team, but anything can happen, and like we've seen with the SEC and ACC when it comes to these 8-game schedules with 14-team conferences, it really just depends on who you draw. In the crossover, sometimes who decides your division.
Yeah, we won't get started with that because I've got a huge issue with that, and it's the same setup in the ACC, the SEC, and the Big Ten. 14 teams, 8 games, so you miss 5 opponents, and the difference in scheduling can be pretty dramatic because, of course, the 6 are the same in the division. Then you could just by happenstance play the 2 best teams in the other division, where one of your chief rivals, another contender in the division, plays the 2 worst teams. So I think it could be done better. Where I really want to take this conversation, John, is the impact of Notre Dame in the schedule, and just your thoughts about Notre Dame taking part in the conference, but not playing in the conference. I don't like the deal. As a guy who follows Big Ten football rather closely, I try to follow college football across the board, but the Big Ten, I thought that was a good fit for Notre Dame, but Notre Dame has continued to separate itself, and then they come up with a deal that I think the ACC couldn't turn down from a financial standpoint and having that connection to Notre Dame, but it's just kind of strange that Notre Dame's going to play these 5 ACC teams but not compete for a conference championship. So just your thoughts on that deal.
I mean, I think, and I said it when it first happened, Notre Dame is a perfect fit for the ACC. Private school, they're pretty much an East Coast school. It just happens to exist in the Midwest. There's a lot of similarities to see there, but as always, Notre Dame believes itself to be above college football, and above the general rules that guide everyone. And what's resulted is, and you even see the original details where, kind of a round-robin setup in which every team played Notre Dame at least once in a 3-year stretch, and one team would play them would play them twice. In this first stretch, from 2014 to 2016, Syracuse was able to score that double game, mostly because of the games being at MetLife Stadium in New Jersey, where a lot of fans in New Jersey and the New York City area who mostly like Notre Dame because of the ties to the Catholic Church would be able to see them, and it's an important market for them. You're seeing that the deal has actually changed a bit now to not exactly be the 5 games we thought it would be, and not to be the same rotation of teams. It seems that I think I saw the details a couple weeks ago. You're only guaranteed, I believe it's 4 dates with Notre Dame over, I think 3 or 4 dates with Notre Dame over like a 12-year span, and they'll be locking in some of those teams. I would assume one of them is probably Notre Dame. It's probably Florida State, and then BC and/or Pitt may be in there as well because they're classic rivals of Notre Dame. So there's already a ton of consternation about them. I don't like the way, and I mean, this is coming from a fan too that saw an even worse treatment towards teams in the Big East when we also shared that conference with them. It was there wasn't even an agreement in place. It was just they were just there for every other sport besides football. And now I think take them or leave them. Florida State grabbed the national championship last year. That had nothing to do with Notre Dame. They have nothing to do with our football conference, and we would do just fine with or without. Obviously, the money's nice, but nothing that involves Notre Dame is easy or simple, and we're finding that once again they're kind of throwing a wrench into what should be a very easy system.
Okay, John. So lastly, the ACC in its entirety as a college football power. My thoughts are that I would love to be able to put a huge dent in the SEC, but I can't come up with an angle. It's just been too good. It definitely has been. I don't think there's any question about that, although I don't think the separation between the SEC and the rest of college football is as great as a lot of people think out there. I think the championship game is taken as the championship game, and it's blown out of proportion, especially when we don't have enough non-conference games to make fair comparison. So the SEC is going to live off of that reputation, and it's probably going to benefit them in having college football playoff teams selected, maybe a 2 when the other 4 conferences have to share 2 slots. We'll see how that plays out. But the SEC is the best. I don't think there's a huge debate there. How it plays after that, there is a lot of debate. The Pac-12 has been considered by many to have emerged as the second best conference. The Big 12 looked good. If you look again, I think 1 and 2 game scenarios get blown out of proportion. So Oklahoma winning over Alabama has kind of propped up the Big 12 to a certain extent, although Baylor seems to show its true colors when it plays a big opponent on a big stage, and I don't think there's much depth in the Big 12. The Big 10, I think, is very top-heavy. Ohio State, Michigan State are extremely good. Penn State's getting better. Wisconsin's very solid. Nebraska's decent. Iowa's decent. The bottom of the Big Ten, even though I think the Big Ten's better than the ACC overall, the Big Ten bottom is atrocious, even more so than the teams that you mentioned earlier, Wake and Virginia. When you look at Purdue and Illinois, they're really bad. We'll see if Maryland and Rutgers add anything to the Big Ten. I don't think they do. I think they add a couple fringe bowl teams. So your thoughts about the ACC and where it stacks up with the other conferences?
I think with the ACC, it's tough, especially coming out of last season. You're looking at there's two very, very dominant programs, like more so than any other conference. There's just two teams that, Clemson and Florida State, that just stand head and shoulders above the other programs in recent years. And it becomes very tough to gauge because you can't take them out of the equation when looking at the full conference, but you also have to keep in mind just how much distance there is between them and everybody else. I think that the SEC and Pac-12 could honestly right now be 1A and 1B. You look at the depth of the Pac-12. I think the depth of the Pac-12 competes. There were 4 teams in the Pac-12 that could compete for a national championship, and there's at least 4 in the SEC. I think, yes, the Cal Golden Bears are terrible, but outside of that, I think they're going to improve. I think Colorado's improving, and everyone else is a potential bowl team. I think the basement on some of the SEC programs might actually be lower than the basement on some of those Pac-12 teams. But then after that, I think it's really a free-for-all. Like you said, the Big 12, I wouldn't even call the Big 12 top-heavy. They will be this year. I think Oklahoma and Baylor are the class of that league. But I think last year you're really looking at just like a lot of teams kind of wandering around, wondering who's going to be dominant. And without a championship game for your league, it's very difficult to establish supremacy when you have a collection of one-loss teams in league play. I think the Big Ten does have a bit of an issue when it comes to just how far the bottom is from the top. Michigan State and Ohio State are elite programs right now, but then you look at Maryland, Rutgers, Indiana, Illinois, and Purdue, and you're looking at 5 out of 14 teams that really just don't register. Maryland, I think they're going to do well this year. I wouldn't call it earth-shattering. I think they're going to do well, but the other 4 are kind of wandering around the wilderness, and that creates an issue from a strength of schedule standpoint. So, if we're looking at everything, I think the ACC gets a slight nudge only because of the recent BCS Bowl success of Florida State and Clemson, but I would caution that I don't think it's by any significant margin that they're better than the Big 12 or Big 10.
Good stuff, John. Appreciate the insight and the information. Did you make an official pick there? Did I find a selection? And if you're saving that for the website, definitely. I don't want you to throw out an ACC prediction, or if I'm putting you on the spot, because I just asked you to knock out this ACC preview. So you don't need to pick a champion. Well, the champion could be kind of a pretty simple pick for all of us, but a championship game possibly. Can you come up with anyone out of the Coastal Division?
Sure. I've made this pick pretty public on the site already. Actually, I'm going Florida State, North Carolina as the championship game. I think like I said with Miami, it really depends on when Ryan Williams gets back. I just think that this is the year that Carolina finally puts it together. I know they've every single year it seems like we're hearing that, and I think this is the year that they finally live up.
Yeah, and the thing with Carolina, it's interesting that if you're talking about the top 10 programs in college football, they're nowhere near it. When is the last time Carolina finished in the top 10? But if you're looking at programs that produce the most NFL players, they're somewhere around 8 or 10 or 11 or 12. They produce much more talent than produces on the field in terms of wins while they're still in college. So I don't know if that's a disparity between recruiting elite talent and then there being a huge gap with the rest of the roster, or they're just not developing players while they're still in college and just having freak athletes run around there in Chapel Hill. I don't know what the deal is there with North Carolina, but they could be the one team that I'm not going to say is going to challenge Florida State, but athletically could make it interesting for a half maybe in the ACC championship game.
No, I absolutely agree there.
All right, John. John Cassillo writes for Noon's Magician, Syracuse platform on SB Nation, and all that is the ACC, and with college football just 2 weeks away. Hey, John, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate the insight.
Hey, thank you, Mark.